heart.
Okay.
And I can answer a hard question with a mind answer. What you can do whatever you want, but how am I supposed to resolve that?
They think you can. So just doing my work.
How am I said I don't know?
Okay.
Women are more diplomatic than men, aren't they? Okay, listen, people, who think? It's mamish exciting. Here, please come and get one of these. Bechlal Yiddishkeit. This is the truth. These men and women in pairs, married, made it. In this generation, in our time, this is a very controversial thing, and it's also very painful for a lot of people, because so many people don't have that is considered to Torah basic and normal on such a foundational level that it isn't even considered part of Torah. It's considered before Torah. In Bereshis it says that this wasn't said to the Jewish people, this is said to humankind. And it separates human beings from animals in a categorical way. I mean, a kid started arguing in yeshiva about it. I said, please, that's not. There are animals that are monogamous, you know that? There are animals that are monogamous, especially birds. But they don't stay together. They get together in the breeding season, they lay eggs, they raise birds, they fledge and they separate. And they come back and they find each other the next year. The only creation, okay, I hate to use the word animal because we're not animals, we're fundamentally different, that is designed to be paired for the purpose of being paired, not just for the purpose of procreation as human beings. The entire Torah revolves around that foundational idea. You take that idea out of Judaism, you don't have Judaism, period. Not you have a different version of it, you don't have Yiddishkeit. I'm convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that if we want to teach Goyim, Sheva Mitzvahs, it begins right here. Being married, family, I think there are ideas in Yiddishkeit that are so based at Yiddishkeit that they're before Yiddishkeit. You know, I tell my students all the time, how does the Rambam open up Hilchas Ishus? How does the Rambam begin the laws of marriage? You know what's the first words? Koydem matan Torah. That's koydem, before the Torah was given. Now, why is it important? And he tells you how it used to be and how it's now. And the Rebbe has a sicha on it, of course. Yiddishkeit has a perspective on how we're supposed to live. It has a perspective on how we were created, and it has a perspective on history. It has a perspective on what the first human beings knew. We hold that the smartest person ever lived was Adam HaRishon and his wife. It's been downhill since. They were created by the Eibishter himself. And there is certain wisdom that they were given as people, which is so deep, it's higher than Torah. It's incorporated into Torah. But the Rambam wants you to know, Koydem matan Torah. There are things in Torah that are deeper than Torah itself. And the most foundational idea is that we're married, we're couples. The Torah is written in a way that it speaks to men. There's no question about it. Teresh B'Ksav, Teresh B'Al Peh. And, you know, I have children, my own kids, who this patriarchy, I mean, we're living in an age where, you know, women are trying to assert themselves and be equal to men. And the Rabbi used to say that the problem with women being equal to men is not to be equal to men. They want to be what men are. And there's a very big difference being equal to men and being what men are. Probably, trust me, I'm a man. There's a lot of problems with being a man. It's not only there's not only an upside, there's a huge downside to being a man, but that's what the culture is. So every single idea in Torah has to be re-examined in our generation, like as if there's no history, like there's no tradition. The Torah sees 600,000 men and their wives. That's the truth.
Okay, I got it.
That's the truth. The men are counted, the women aren't counted, but there's a presumption. There's a presumption of togetherness. You see, now you have to understand the problem with this. The problem with this is that nobody cares about this.
Well, they do.
I'm not sure.
Otherwise, you wouldn't have asked it. It's like a live thing.
No, you don't understand. She doesn't care about the traditional value.
For sure.
So how am I going to answer her?
No, but it's an answer.
It's not an answer. It's an upsetting answer. It's a putting her back in jail answer. It's again the same control answer. Yes. Yes.
There's a part of acceptance that we have
There
to
is.
have.
It's not
That
acceptance.
comes before the Torah,
It's really
so-
not acceptance.
So what is it?
It's enlightenment.
Okay.
It's teaching. It's teaching. What are the teaching? I do this for a living. I talk to teenagers. I mean, this is not exactly teenagers. These are adults. You know, this is a mature group. But I talk to kids a whole day. I talk to boys. I talk to girls. That's what I do. And I quote unquote defend Judaism over and over and over again. And I always tell my students, it's a broken record with me. You know? The hardest thing you'll ever do in your life is get married. I think it's harder than raising children. And raising children is hell. I don't mean hell in a bad way. It's just it makes you old. But it's the best thing you'll ever do in your life. If you do it like a Jew. My father's Zagin, he's been constantly couples for Shalom Bayis for forever. He says, marriage in Torah is not marrying a person, it's marrying an idea. It's the idea of being together, they're being coupled. It's foundational to our religion. And that's what that means. You know, Judaism is not a religion, it's a way of life. It's a way, it's a social order, it's a culture, it's a way of life that includes Hashem in every detail. Yiddishkeit is total. Not total control, total. You live as a Jew in every piece of your life. And it only works if you embrace it all. In the Mishnah it says, in this we have the greatest freedom. You know why? Because it maximizes us. We become bigger and better and greater. Because we follow the Torah. By listening to the Eibishter, we're not stuck in this box that emancipates us, it frees us. Why? Because it gives us strength. It gives us self-control. It gives us direction. That makes us not prisoners to every stupidity that comes along and the wind blows like this, and the wind blows like this, and the wind blows like this. This is what Yiddishkeit gives. And at some point, you just got to buy in. And when you keep going back to these same things, again, I've said this 1,000 times. I said it here 10 times. I was once in the Chabad house in Manhattan for a Shabbos on the west side, the Upper West Side. So one of the shluchim said to me, I forgot even how it came up. Rabbi, everybody in Manhattan is single. I said, what do you mean? No one's married? There's no other people married. But everybody is single. I said, I don't understand. They're married, they're not single. No, they're single. What does that mean? They don't really get married. They don't understand the concept. Now, understand that marriage is it's distinctly a religious idea. There's no secular concept of marriage. There's a secular concept of cohabitation, the secular concept of next of kin, the secular concept of making decisions in times of end of life questions. But marriage, the two people become so one that they become inseparable. Their whole reality is one another. It's a tight idea. It's so deep a tight idea. It's deeper than Torah itself. And you embrace it. And all of these questions go away if you're able to embrace that. But if you're stuck in this, we have to make it fair business, you have to understand the modern world is very smart, but the modern world is so unbelievably immature, so stupid. These new ideas, these new values, they sound so good and they're sold so well. And we do such a poor job of representing ourselves. And Yiddishkeit is so old-fashioned. What we have is so tough. It's been around so long. It's been attacked so many times. Let's grow up. Every time I go back to the drawing board, so when I get it from a 17-year-old, I have an obligation to answer them. But a teacher in Sifka, I really have to answer her? Really? Now tell me, what are you going to tell her?
somewhat of what you said, but I'm also gonna recommend at the end that you should call you because I think you.
No, I don't have time. I don't have
Well, I
time.
think you answered it, I'm sorry.
Of course I answered it, but she's not going to like my answer.
I know.
Because she's got smell in her nose. You know the old story? This little bird runs wherever the world it smells. If I have stink on my nose, wherever I go, I French back.
Because the question came up, that's why, I get it.
The-
Yeah, the question I get it, it shouldn't come up.
What's going on?
Right.
So you dialed my number and you wasted my time. Everyone was entertained. I didn't record this, by the way. The girls were online. I didn't put my machine on yet.
This was not a waste of time.
I know it wasn't a waste of time. I thought it was a waste of time. I wouldn't have responded. But you have to understand my point of view. You know how many times I was here? You know how many times? I remember sitting here in Bachachana 30 years ago, 32 years ago, 33 years ago. Before the stroke, when people came for dollars, one of the hottest tickets in Machon was Sunday. Women came from all over the tri-state area. They came for $1. They come in for learning. And a full room. I sit in this room and the next room and teach. There was a Crown Heights lady who came every Sunday. Very intelligent, but a big nudnik. And every once in a while, she'd just ask me questions. She was a frum lady, a Chassidish lady, the whole 9 yards. Just, I don't think it's women can put film on. I don't think it's fair. And this room full of college students, people I don't even know. And I just one day had it. Bechlal, I have a short fuse. My upside is I bring everything I have to the classroom. My downside is I hurt people's feelings. I'm not going to deny it. I can't not be me. This is what I do. I don't come to the class and talk in a monotone. I don't do that. I give my whole heart, give my whole mind. But I hurt people's feelings when I tell them good morning sometimes. I'm a very strong person. I'm whatever. I'm not a strong personality, but I come across as a strong personality. So this woman was so upset. Rabbi, why do you have to insult me like that? So I said to her, after class, we had this whole thing. I said, listen, you can ask any question. Don't you think there's a way to ask a question? Do you really have an issue with God? Do you? Well, I don't have an issue with Taita, but I still. So then why do you have to say it that way? Why do you have to say it that way? There's so many delicate ways to raise the question. In the Haggadah, the Chacham and the Rosh say exactly the same thing. The Rosh says, what are you doing? The Chacham says, what did God teach you? But the Chacham says, what did our God teach you? And the Rosh says, what are you doing? In other words, the Rosh says, until you convince me, I'm not convinced. The Chacham says, I know this is true, I want to understand. You see what I'm saying? So I've evolved. When I was 30, I was consumed by the question of science and religion. It bothered me. I'm bored by it. I'm bored by it. And this is not feminism. It's much more intellectual. It's less personal. I'm bored by it. Why? I've been through it so many times. And I understand how unimportant it is. It's not important. First of all, it's not true. It's not true that science can attack Judaism. It's just not true. But how many times can you go over the same thing again? I remember, I'll never forget this. It was one of the most moving experiences of my life. Yirmiyah Branover came to Lubavitcher Yeshiva, where I worked. The great professor. Branover is a brilliant man. He's steeped in science. But he's such a chassid. It's a pshin. He's a chassid. He's like a child. Mamish. What did he come to talk about? Mashiach, but not Mashiach. The Rebbe's Mashiach. You see, this great intellectual is going to convince a bunch of boys that he's convinced. So I wanted to talk about science and religion. So I got him. I cornered him after his talk, and I started asking questions. He was so bored. He was so not interested in talking to me. He was passionate, not interested, and I was very hurt. I was hurt. I was insulted. Why can't he answer my question? But from the non-answer, I got an unbelievable piece of instruction. I was where you are. I'm no longer where you are. It's a boring question. It's a boring question, For a long time, I was upset with him. For years, I had no relationship with him, but Baruch Hashem, I was upset with him. People are upset with me that I have no relationship with also. I remember I was in Toronto later, and I stayed in the home of a man who's a physicist, a scientist, smart guy. I had exactly the same experience of Branover. He became frum, he got involved with the Zaltzman, he had questions, and he said, so Yossel Zaltzman, the head shliach of the Russian, says to him, listen, Professor Branover is coming, you're staying in your home, ask one question you want. And it was how he answered him. He started talking about dating, carbon dating, the age of the universe. So he said 5 words. You have to look at I forgot the words he used, but the outcome something rather. He used a physics term, which means that when you're doing extrapolatory measuring, it's very, very unreliable. But he literally said 1 sentence. And I said to him, that's all you got out of him? He says he wasn't interested in discussing it. But you learn from the water interest, you can be offended. Really? We're still talking about this? Really? Is Yiddishkeit so poor for you that you mamish think that the modern world has something to offer you? Let's be honest about it. What liberated women? The suffragettes? ERA? The washing machine? The refrigerator? The car? 95% of women's liberation is women's opportunity. Women were busy. If you wanted an outfit, you had to sew it. If you wanted to wash clothes, you went down to the river. You hung them on a clothesline. Women were, the interpretation of women and men's and women's roles historically is so biased. In other words, when you hear about how women were oppressed and women were taken advantage of and used on, it's so far from the truth. So you create a whole enemy class, and then you have to redeem them. And there is some truth to it. Of course, there's some truth to it, but a very small percentage of the truth. We have the most precious thing in the world. You know what we have? We have wisdom, which isn't stupid. We have wisdom which doesn't get swayed by every time the wind blows. Oh no, maybe there's a man and a woman and I don't know, whatever you want to be. So you expect the kids to be drawn in. They're young. I tell my students all the time, you're smarter than me, you're quicker than me, you're sharper than me, you're more curious than me, but you're dumb. You don't know anything about life. I was once you, it's the truth. When I was 25, I was so much sharper than it. My mind worked better, I had more physical strength, and I was more curious, and I needed answers. Now I understand that you don't need an answer. You can sleep. Because there's more important things than intellectual answers to questions. But there's a point that we really, I'm talking to teachers in Besivka about feminism. Really, I want to do this, So what are you going to tell her? What are you going to tell her?
This other half, I'm sure.
Of course not. So as I told you, I can't answer the question. The right wording is, this is childish. Nine times chances out of 10, she'll say, well, I didn't really mean it.
22 years old, the teachers. I'm probably
they're kids. They're children.
Yeah.
Okay. They're children. Tell them to come to Besivka Seminary and go to the Q&A and answer the questions. I do questions and answers. He's welcome to put the question up on my list. Go to my website and put up the question. Write a question you want. I answer the questions. Because anyone else will hear the answers. That can be offensive to everybody, not just to her. Equal opportunity offensiveness. Okay, people. I got up at 6 o'clock. I've been working on this class for all morning, mamish all morning, because we're back to Siddur. And Siddur is hard for me to teach, but it's a labor of love. I'm sorry if people who are on the internet that it came on so late, but we were having a fight about something that you couldn't listen to, so I disincluded you. It was a fight that no one's allowed to hear. It's exclusive to Becholi. Trust me, you didn't miss anything important, I promise. But you were waiting for me, so I apologize. I probably got a message. Where are you? First of all, you're not sorry. You shouldn't be sorry.
I'm
but
sorry
I know.
But I'm not sorry that I asked you that question. Because now I can...
But tomorrow there's another one, and another one, and another one, and another. We grow up. I get it.
Did you turn off the Zoom or is it still on?
This one?
Yeah.
No, I didn't turn it off. The base Mechon Liyad has got to hear that.
Okay.
that particular version of me being hysterical, but I didn't put it up on my group.
All right.
Yeah, people are watching. The whole world is watching. But two people, the whole world is watching me. Okay, Rabbi Sai, we alternate between Sichos and Siddur. That's what we do. And the last chunk of time, which started at the end of last year, we were doing the third day of preparation to receive the Torah. We did the first day, then we did some Siddur. We did the second day, did some Siddur. And then we did the third day, which was a Wednesday, the 3rd of Sivan, which is the day that the plan was suggested that was refuted, that didn't even happen. So I had planned. So we did this Maimed Edus, which took forever and a half. And I'm not going to apologize teaching it to you, even though I'm sorry. It took longer than I should have taken. And I had a Sicha that I was going to teach you afterwards. I got up this morning, I sat down with the Sicha, and I said, nope, it's enough. It's enough. The reason I'm not teaching you the Sicha is because it's more in line with the Maimed than with the Chumash. I'm teaching you the Sichas that are on Chumash. I did enough on prophecy and credibility. I decided it's enough. So this morning I said, okay, I got to teach Siddur. So I started to scramble. Siddur, every Siddur class takes my guts out. I prepare a lot. Why? Because I don't know anything. I'm one class ahead of you. And so I made myself a bunch of copies. Here's my stack. Here's my stack. It's a lot of pages, 57 pages of copies. And I started reading. Did I get through everything? No. I'll be prepared to teach these classes when I'm finished teaching these classes. That's usually how this goes. But I don't have that luxury. I got to come and teach. Now, you saved me half an hour of teaching by the way.
10 minutes.
It's 11:15.
No, let's just say at 11:10 I watched.
11:15. We started at 10 to 11.
You came at 10 too. I questioned.
No, I didn't come at 10 to. Okay, now we're arguing about time. Anyway, you say, you're right. Forget it. You're right. Who cares? You're right. Okay, but bottom line is I have less to teach. So I'm giving you this piece of paper. I hand you this piece of paper. And this is the next item in Siddur. What's going to happen is we're doing what's called L'Shem Yichud, and I'm probably going to do Baruch Shama right away. In other words, I'm not going to go back to the Chumash after the L'Shem Yichud. Baruch Shama is going to take a long time. I have to figure out how I'm doing Baruch Shama. There's a part of me that just wants to do the Alter Rebbe. There's chassidus on every line of Baruch Shama. There's so much. You can sit in Baruch Shama for your whole life and study and never run out of things to say. So I'm undecided how I'm doing Baruch Shama, but I'm probably doing it contiguous. This shouldn't take very long, a week or 2 or 3, okay? So what we're doing now is the line on your page that I underlined, L'Shem Yichud Kutsha Brich V'Shchinte L'Yachado Shem Yudke B'Vavki B'Chudesh L'Shem. So these are words from our Siddur. If you look at the bottom of the page, you'll see what other Jews who say this prayer say. It's quite different. Hareini Mizamen Espi L'Hoides L'Halal L'Shabeach Es Boiri L'Shem Yichud Kutsha Brich V'Shchinte. You don't say L'Yachado Shem Yudke B'Vavki. Ayedei Hahu Tamer V'Nelam. And we finish the same way, B'Shem Kol Yisrael. I wanted you to see a contrast. Okay, this, before we say Baruch Shama, we read these words. So now begins my lecture, okay? You know what, let me translate the words for you, okay? For the sake of the union of the Holy One, blessed be He, with His Shekhinah, to unite the name Yudke with the Vavke in perfect union in the name of all Israel. You understand now? Is the English any more helpful than the Hebrew? I'm not sure, right? Go ahead.
I'm curious, why is it in Aramaic? Not where? It's like
Where is the
the underlined.
Okay, so I don't know for sure. My guess is because its real source is the Zayar. I'm going to be discussing with you the evolution of this tefillah a little bit. I don't know that much. A classic prayer has a lot of classic commentaries. This is not a classic prayer, so you're really, to a very great extent, you're looking for things. They write, the source of this prayer is in a sefer called Kisei Malach and the Agdam of Tikkun Ezeh. The Agdam of Tikkun Ezeh and Kisei Malach is 50 pages. Go find this. I picked it up twice. And I flipped it. I'm not flipping anymore. So I'm supposed to find it. What's wrong with telling me a page number, for heaven's sakes? It's the Agdam of Tikkun Ezeh. And the answer to the question is, if you're that dumb, you're not entitled to know, right? Well, guess what? I'm that dumb. So I couldn't even find the first source of this prayer, which is in the sefer called Kisei Melech. Kisei Melech overlap with the Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe was 35 when the Machaber of this Sefer passed away. His name was Abshalom Buzagalu. He was a Sfadi. He was born in 1700 and passed away in 1780. The Alter Rebbe was born in 1745, by contrast. So he's Buzagalu. Buzgalu, I don't know how to pronounce it. But he's way after the Arizal, way after the Arizal. The Arizal passed away in the 16th century, in the 1500s. And this is the same, he was born in 1700. That's the first time this prayer appears. So it's based on Arizal. There's a big controversy what Arizal holds about this. But there's actually a Zohar that has words that create the foundation for this idea, and it's become incorporated and mainstreamed. Let me approach this step by step as I prepared it, okay? That's what we're learning. We're learning Shem Yichud. That's our topic. The background for this is that the Siddur is one of the oldest books we have. Besides for the Tanakh, it's the oldest thing we own. Besides for the scripture, for the Chav Da'at Sfam, 24 books of Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, Mr. Torah, prophets, and writings, the Siddur was written by the same people who sealed the Tanakh. They closed it, no more. Done. They wrote the Siddur. So the Siddur goes back to, you read the Pirkei Avos, the first Mishnah, Moshe came with the Messina, Mitzvah Yeshua, Yeshua, the Kenrus, Kenrus, Nevi'im, Misrul, Ajkas, Agadayla. They wrote the Siddur. The last of them was a fellow named Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik had a disciple named Antignos Shtoichai, and after Antignos Shtoichai begins what's called Tkufas HaZugais, where the leaders of the Jewish people are paired. Niti ben Harbeli and Yeshua ben Prachi, Yosef ben Yezen, Yosef ben Yechanan. So the Siddur is older than the Tkufas HaZugais. You're talking about 600 years before the Mishnah is written. 859 years before the Gemara is written. It's the oldest book we have, the Siddur. But we have no idea how that Siddur looked. Because first of all, it was not written down. It was oral. Just like the Mishnah was not written down. People knew how to pray, prayed by heart. Which is why the style of our prayer revolves so much around the Shliach Tzibur, around the Chazan, around the Shatz. Because if you go back to the beginning of the Siddur, the average man and woman came to shul and just sat and said, Amen. The Chazan read, the Chazan said, he wrote by heart. So being a Chazan was a big deal. It was a big deal. Because you had to know that the first occasion of the recording of the Siddur, writing it down, probably coincides with the writing of the Mishnah, which is 600 years after it was composed. The oldest versions that we have are about 1,200 years old, 1,300 years old, which is about 400 years after that. So in other words, the oldest Siddurim that were written down were 600 years after they were comprised. We don't have texts of that. We don't have original texts of this. We have Siddur of Reb Amram Gon, the Reb Sadi Gon. Reb Amram Gon is a complete Siddur, the oldest draft of Siddur which we have available. It's about 1,200 years old. The Siddur is twice that age. It's 2,500 years old. What's for sure true is that as time passes, the Siddur gets bigger and bigger and bigger, like Pinocchio's nose. Bigger and bigger, it never gets smaller, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But one of the important things in studying Siddur is to always remember where's the original, where's the addition. It's something that I obsess over. In other words, where should you invest most of your kavanah? You should invest most of your kavanah in the parts of the Siddur that are the hardest to understand because they're the oldest. The prayers that were written last week they speak straight to your heart. Why? Because we wrote them based on how we feel. The Siddur was written by people who were basically Nevi'im, prophets. It's not considered Torah Shebeksav, it's not considered scripture, but it's as close to Torah Shebeksav as you're going to get. It's very, very holy. So knowing which is the original Siddur and what's the additions to the Siddur is very, very important. And the parts of the Siddur you enjoy are really not that important. The parts of the Siddur seem very, very hard to understand. They're actually critically important. And if you can figure that out and you can put your kavanah there, You won't be davening better. You'll be davening correctly. You understand? The most important part of davening is really the Shemana Esrei. Because it doesn't work for me. It doesn't have enough emotional words. It's too quick. And there's so many irrelevant things. Now, how many times you talk about Mashiach? How many times? Huh? How many times? Once is not enough. 6 times? How many brachas are ultimately about Mashiach? It's unbelievable. But the people who wrote the Siddur knew what they were doing. And our job is to study their mind and to try and daven in a constructive way, in a way which is consistent with the original intent. To give you a Hasidic example for this that you can relate to is when Rosh Hashanah comes. If you daven based on the oldest version of the Siddur, you know that the davening Rosh Hashanah is about making Hashem a king. If you daven based on more recent versions of the Siddur, you daven based on the fact that the Eibush is judging you, you don't want to get punished. It's 2 totally different experiences. Chassidus takes you back to of course, I have a bias, but to the true version of what the Rosh Hashanah is by giving you a true insight into what the davening is about. It's just one example. There's thousands of examples for the same. But having said that, I was sitting in yeshiva, and I'm the old man there too. So one of the younger teachers, I've chosen his age, says, I'm giving a Siddur class, give me any advice. And he was so disappointed by my advice. I said to him, try to separate the later parts of the Siddur from the original parts of the Siddur and try to get people to see the original Siddur. I think that's where the beauty lies. That's where the infinity is, to see what the Anshe HaKadosh wrote. They wrote benching. They wrote Hamapil. They wrote Birchas Krishma. A lot of stuff that we say was added later. It's very holy. There's not a word in our Siddur which is not made by the holiest of holies. But the farther back you go, it's not just that it's more authentic. It's more consistent with what they wanted when they decided how we should daven. And it gives framework to everything. Having said that, the Siddur, the way I understand it, and I'm a very small expert, God knows I'm a small expert, but I obsess over it, and I'm teaching it. And as I say in the real world, I mean well, so I can therefore mislead you because I mean well. One of America's greatest excuses, as long as you mean well. I mean well. It seems to me that the Siddur has moments of radiation. I mean, the Siddur was written. They davened that nusach for hundreds of years. Over time, and then one day, a group of people came along and said, you know what? Let's add more. And they added a lot more in a relatively short period of time. And then that stayed that way for a very, very long time. And then a group of people came and said, you know what? We're going to add more. And they added a lot more. And it's pretty much stayed that way ever since. So when was the Siddur enhanced? When was the Siddur made bigger? If you go back to the Siddur of the Goinim, the davening was pushed very short. You could daven their shachris in 10 minutes and say the word slowly. But they did a lot less reading. It's added and added and added. So there's certain points in history that you sort of understood that the Siddur was expanded. I don't know all those points. I really don't. And I don't know the extent of each point. But I think at the end of the Chufas HaShas, the beginning of the Goinim, the Siddur was enhanced significantly. I believe that the Rishonim, that means people who lived around the time of the Rambam and Rashi, contributed to making the Siddur much bigger. And lastly, the Mekubalim. In other words, twice or 3 times in the history of the Siddur, and I'm not sure precisely when, but I sort of have a vague guess, Gedolei Yisrael added to the Siddur. But when they added to the Siddur, they didn't add a line. They added a lot. Okay, much bigger, you know? For example, every day you're supposed to say Psukei de Zimra. Psukei de Zimra was a topic we spent half of last year discussing. I was introducing Psukei de Zimra. From Baruch Sh'amar Tishal Psukei de Zimra. The original Psukei de Zimra was one pasuk. And that's it. Then it became the whole Ashrei. Then it became all the Kapitel Chtilim from Ashrei till the end. And they got bigger and bigger and bigger. Everybody does it. Sfardim, Ashkenazim, Chassidim, Misnagdim, Italian Jews, Yemenite Jews. I mean, right? Most Jews daven from the same Sichos. If you are, they don't like to use the word Sfardim. They get very upset with it. Eidut HaMizrach, Eastern Jews.
No, we use Yadut Sfaradi on the Siddur.
I know, but I was told Al Tagid Sfaradim, Edut Mizrach. They say you cannot call Persian Jews Sfaradim, they're not Sfaradim. They get very sensitive about it. So I'll be a nice guy. I'll serve their purposes. Whenever I tell Sfaradi, Nusach Sfard, no, Edut Mizrach. But Turkish Jews daven at Nusach, Turkey is Europe. Lebanese Jews, Syrian Jews, Jordanian Jews, Egyptian Jews, Moroccan Jews, Iraqi communities of Jews, and Persians. They daven the same Nusach, same Siddur. But then there's a group of Jews called Taiman, Yemenites. Now we would, huh?
You're right.
Right, but they're Sfadim, right? They whatever they are, but they have a whole different Nusach. In today's world, most Ashkenazic Jews daven the same Nusach, except for those terrible, terrible guys called the Hasidim, who not only changed the Nusach from Ashkenaz, which is a big enough sin, but they did a double sin. The Hasidim not only changed from the Ashkenaz, but they changed the Ashkenaz to be closer to Sfad. Now that's terrible. It's like giving in to the enemy, you know? But that's the truth. Hasidim have their own Nusach. Now, within Hasidim, there's a lot of variation. Within Ashkenaz, there's some variation. Within Sfad, there's variation. But in terms of distinct nuschos, I think Yemenite Jews have their own nusach. Italian Jews have their own nusach. It's such a fascinating thing. Rome was responsible for the expulsion of so many Jews from so many countries so many times. They never, ever expelled Italian Jewry. It's so hypocritical. The Italian Jewish community is one of the oldest uninterrupted communities. European Jews who lived in Western Europe, right? England, France, Germany, they were all kicked out. Spain. And the hundreds of years there were no Jews in these countries, and then they slowly trickled back in. Italy, which was responsible for all of the expulsions, never expelled their Jews. So Italia has its own world. I don't know much about it. I just understand that the Italians have their own nusach, Yemenites have their own nusach. The Arizal writes that there's four big nuschos. There's Sfad, Ashkenaz, Italy, and Castile, which is a neighborhood in Sfad, in Spain. I have a siddur called Siddur Castilla. I bought it. I saw it, I bought it. I paid a lot of money for it. You sell me a siddur that I don't have, I'll pay for it and I'll buy it. These are distinct nuschos. But within each of these groups, pretty much we're all saying the same thing. There's a lot of smaller differences from group to group, okay? But the way the siddur evolved was, once upon a time, we had a very short siddur, we did the same thing. Let's say sometime the Tkufas HaGiyonim, they added a bunch more, like who wrote you Hi Chavoid? Who decided to say Mizmah the Seder? It's been a part of our siddur, who does say Hoidu? Goes back a very long time. Very, very long time. It doesn't go back to the beginning of the siddur. But you have to understand, Yichavoid is all psukim. But it's a pasuk from here, and a pasuk from here, and a pasuk from here, and a pasuk from here. Somebody put it together. And that somebody lived so long ago that we don't even fight about it. Now, what kind of Jew are if you don't fight about something, you know? I once showed someone from my class, something for Yichavoid. I blew his mind. If you had Siddurim handy, I would show this to you, because it's mamish mind-blowing. It's worth it. I'm going to waste your time. Get a siddur. I want to show you something. Can you get a siddur? Everybody, get the same siddur. The same one, and bring me a copy so that I can use the same numbers and the same ibids. Take a bunch of them and hand them out. Just an example. It's just an example. But make sure we have the same page numbers and the same, you know what I'm talking about. Can you get a couple more? You're the only one who got up.
Sure.
But they should be the same. It should be
The same?
the same, the blue ones, the blue.
I think it's just different. But still Sichos.
Yeah, I don't think they're in here. There is one blue. We don't have more.
Okay, so can we share? It's going to take about a second. You send that to me and share.
Which one?
The blue one. The blue. It's different.
No,
It's the same.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to show you something. It's just so interesting. And what's interesting about it is who knows?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to go to page 31. Page 31? Yehi Chavoid? Yeah?
Yep.
Does everybody have the same thing? Yehi Chavoid? Are we good? So go down.
Yeah.
You see we have the number 7 in your text. See number 7?
Yeah.
Right? Are you with me?
Yeah.
Hashem Hefer Atzas Goyim Heini Machshves Amim. Look at number 8. Ibid 33:10, right? Read the next pasuk. Rabbis Machashavas Belev Ish V'Tzas Hashem Yisakim. Look at number 9. Proverbs 19:21, right? Look at the next pasuk. Atzas Hashem Le'elam Tamid Machshves Libel David. Look at number 10. Psalms 33:11. You see what's going on? You read 33:10, change the subject, read a pasuk from Mishlei, and then 33:11. You see what's going on? You read 2 psukim, one after the next from Tillim, and in the middle, you throw in a pasuk from Mishlei. You tell me why. There's 2 psukim, one after the next. You see? Now, what's the difference? In the first and the third pasuk, you have first the word Eitzah and then the word Machshava. In the middle pasuk, you have the first the word Machshava and then the word Eitzah. So the Tillim is consistent. Eitzah, before you think, you plan, right? So Eitzah, Machshava, Eitzah. And someone decided that between these 2 Eitzahs and Machshavas, you got to throw in a pasuk which goes the other way. There's a reason for this. How many people notice that? How did I notice it? My point is, whoever wrote Yehi Chavayit lived so long ago that even Hasidim and Misnagdim don't argue about it. Even Sfardim and Ashkenazim, even other Yemenites argue about it. Now, it's possible that they do. I mean, the Yemen Siddur is so ancient that they may have differences that no other Jews have, not Sfardim, not Ashkenazim, not Italians. I don't know. And it's wonderful. If you can get all these Siddurim, but it takes forever to learn one paragraph. You can't go through this in a day unless you got a mind like Steinsaltz. You know, you learn one paragraph and you start noticing differences and you say, why? There's always a reason. But anyway, someone wrote this prayer a long time ago. Now, it's psukim from Tillim. But it's not a kapitel, it's a compilation. One from here, one from here, one from here. Whoever did this lived so long ago that we all agree we should say it the way he wrote it. He's not 2,500 years old. He's probably 1,800 years old, 1,500 years old, 1,200 years old. Exactly when Yehi Chavayit was put into our Siddur after Baruch Shaman, I don't know. It's been there for a very, very long time. But it's at one of those moments when the Siddur was stretched. So over time, people make adaptations. Siddhas always change. I mean, in the times of the Baal Shem Tov, the Misnagdim argued about their Siddur. The Ashkenazim argued about their Siddur because they are diktuk obsessed. To them, the most important thing is grammar. But grammar, Hebrew grammar, is such a controversial subject because there's no book of Hebrew grammar. Who wrote the book in Hebrew grammar? It's called the Tanakh. The Tanakh. Look at Hebrew grammar. You have to extrapolate from the Tanakh Hebrew grammar, and you can argue about what it means. So even amongst the Rishonim, the earliest experts at diktuk, which are people who lived before Rashi, you know, Menachem. Rashi mentions names of people you never heard of. Menachem. These were Bali Mediktuk, Bali Mesoida. Their whole thing was in understanding the original language and therefore explaining the words and the syntax and all the rest. Okay. So you can have literally an argument of what's the correct grammar based on how you interpret a pasuk. So then 2 Ashkenazim will say, we're obsessed with diktuk, are going to write the Siddur differently because they understand the Tanakh differently. It never finishes. But big changes don't happen every day. They don't. Big changes happen a few times in our Siddur, a few times. The last big radiation of Siddur goes back to the Mekubalim, the great Kabbalists. Okay, the name that we know, of course, most is because we are Chabadniks, and I don't think we have exclusive rights. Most Jews would agree with this, by no means all, but a lot of Jews. The Arizal is. He was the youngest and the last of the Kabbalists, but he was by far the greatest. No one questions that Arizal. At least most people don't question Arizal. And he made huge contributions to the Siddur. What to add, how to order it, how many words to use in a prayer, all kinds of things like that, which Arizal enhanced in the Siddur. one of the most interesting pieces of Jewish history as far as the Siddur goes is this, that the Yemenite Jews, the Yadus Taimon, which was very, very isolated for hundreds of years, when the Arizal came along, he lived in Eretz Yisrael. He lived closer to Yemen than we are. So, like most communities in the world, the Arizal was a fever. The Arizal was a hysteria. He swept the world. He's such an unusual man. He got away with not even being questioned. The Rambam was questioned. The Arizal had almost no hisnagdas. It's amazing. During his lifetime, and certainly after he passed. So Yemenite Jews changed from their tradition and they started doing things according to Kabbalah. About 150 years ago, some guy came and said, "Excuse me, sir, we're Rambamists. We're Maimonidean Jews." And there became a huge split in the Yemenite community. Can I give you one of these, please? Where half of the Yemenite community continued the tradition of adaptations, the changes they made from their traditional siddur and custom based on Arizal, and the other half went back to saying, no, we follow Rambam. And there's two communities within Yemen. They have two different siddurim. People know their names. I never remember them. But the irony of it was that at one point all the Yemenite Jews went in this direction, and then half said, "No, we're going back." It's not like half went away and half stayed. Everybody was swept away, and half said, "We're going back to the tradition." Anyway, so the siddur is a dynamic, it's a living thing. Every contributor to the siddur was very great and very, very holy and very concerned with precision and exactitude, in spite of how dynamic it is. The bottom line is, I think we would agree that, let's say, after in the last 250 years, very little has changed in the siddur. In other words, 500 years ago, 400 years ago, that the emergence of the age of Kabbalah affected significant change in the Nusach, both in terms of the wording and also additions before. It's much easier to add something before you daven in the middle of davening, add something after the davening in the middle of davening. But the Mekubalim really made a lot of real changes to the Nusach before, during, and after the davening. And for the most part, they're universally accepted. Meaning, Chassidim and Mistagim didn't argue about that. The ideas that the Arizal added to the Siddur are brought in Malach, the Magen Avraham brings. He was an Ashkenazi. And they sort of accepted that we do this. And obviously, the Sephardic communities, the Sephardic Jews, Eidut HaMizrach, they always felt that you have to put Kabbalah ahead of Halacha. Ashkenazim struggled with this question. But the last time our Siddur was substantially stretched was in the age of Kabbalah. The Arizal, the Ramak, the Arizal, there were two generations. Before them was the Avodas HaKodesh, and then after them, they're Talmidim. You know the name Chidah. Chidah was one of the great Sephardic leaders who contributed to Siddur a lot. It was all in the spirit. It was all in the spirit of Kabbalah. These changes were made. Okay? One of the significant changes that happened to our liturgy, that happened to our davening, is this concept called L'Shem Yichud, which you have in front of you. L'Shem Yichud, and Adin Steinsaltz writes in his Adin Even Yisrael writes in his Siddur, the guy is such a genius. It's not normal how that man knew. It's not normal how that man knew. He wrote so many Svarim. He has 2 Svarim and Siddur. It's unbelievable. What's amazing about his books is he sat down one afternoon and spoke into a tape recorder. Someone typed it up, printed it, there you go. He didn't sit and write it. You don't write 256 books in 80 years by writing books. He was an unbelievable mind. Unbelievable mind. There's nothing that he didn't know. And he dedicated his life to Yidden, to Yiddishkeit. That's all he wanted. Fascinating. So he writes that the first time L'Shem Yichud appeared in a sefer called Kisei Melech, which is a commentary to Kon Isaiah. Kisei Melech lived between 1700 and 1780. Okay? The Arizal passed away, Shin Lamed Gimel. Shin Lamed Gimel is 1573. Now, these are passed away more than 100 years before this man was born. So L'Shem Yichud is a new kid on the block. It's been very, very recently introduced to our Nusach HaTfilah. And most Jews say it. Not all. Sfardim say it. Chassidim say it. Ashkenazim don't say it. But the truth of the matter is, if you look at some Ashkenazi cities, you see a lot of inconsistencies. Inconsistency is the diplomatic word for hypocrisy. But they say it when they want to. By Sfiras Ha'omer, we like it. It's a beautiful group, we're not going to skip it. Sfiras Ha'omer, they say it. The Shechayim, they say it before davening. Shumay finished. It's interesting that something so recent has taken on such universal appeal, which tells you how much credibility this person had. This Shalom Bazagalu, he was a great Mekubal. He wrote classic Sfarim on Zayir, he wrote commentary on Zayir, which Chassidus quotes all the time. The Rabbeim are very, very specific about who they quote in Kabbalah. He's one of the few Sfarim that's quoted Nochanan. And he writes, I didn't see his original. I looked, I did not see, I'm telling you, I didn't see his original, but the Rabbi Evan Yisrael writes, that the first person to actually write this prayer down was the Shalom Bazagalu, who passed away about 200 years ago, all told. 1780, I'm holding 2000, that's 300 years ago, yeah? 250 years ago. Here's what you don't know about the Shem Yichud. When he introduced that prayer, he introduced it that every time you do a mitzvah, you should say it. Before you do a mitzvah, you should verbally say, I'm about to do a mitzvah. That was his idea. Now, I'm a lubab. So we say it once a day. But I'm a curious lubab. I love to see other customs. It's not like when you see someone do it different, then it makes me less right. I'm incredibly curious about other minhagim. I grew up in the Crown Heights that was very mixed. I'm not old enough to remember Mistagdim in Crown Heights, Ashkenazim, but I grew up with all kinds of Hasidim. I saw many customs, and I love them. I was influenced by them. I don't do them, but they're singing and they're the way they daven. It's different communities, different feels. Okay, so I was once in this. I spent several summers in Paris Chana. It's a girls' camp. There's no minions. I went to the Satmar bungalow every day. You walk into the shul in the morning. Before the guy puts on talis, he has a 3/4 of a page, a whole prayer about tzitzis. It's gorgeous, and at the heart of it are these same words, the Shem Yichud. So they all walk around when they daven. They walk around. It's walking around them singing a whole beautiful song, and it's beautiful. So I picked up the siddur and I read it, and I told him I'm jealous. It's not in our nusach. He's a 3/4 of a page, a whole song and dance about tzitzis. Then he puts on the talis. Then he starts wandering around again. Another 3/4 of a page for tefillin. And in the heart of that prayer is the L'Shem Yichud, which is connected to tefillin, and he puts on his tefillin. Every single mitzvah comes with L'Shem Yichud. Every single mitzvah comes with L'Shem Yichud. Before Baruch Shem, you say L'Shem Yichud. Now, do you say L'Shem Yichud before you bench? I'm not sure about that. But my grandfather, Zahav Lichten Ganed, my mother's father, Zaidi Stern, was not a Lubavitcher, but he came from Hasidic stock, and he davened Nusach Sfad. I was at his Seder. I think for every cup of wine, there was a L'Shem Yichud. Before matzah was L'Shem Yichud. There was a lot of it. L'Shem Yichud means before I'm going to do a mitzvah, I have to say I'm doing a mitzvah for Eibishter with the proper kavod. That's what it means. And some rabbi decided, before you do a mitzvah, say with your mouth, I'm doing this for the sake of Hashem. To use the classic terminology, you want to do it lishma, right? You don't want to do it shaloi lishma, you want to do it lishma. You want to do it for the right reason, you don't want to do it for the wrong reason. So very recently, from the perspective of the Siddur, very recently, in the last couple of 100 years, a Yid came along and said, I want you to say L'Shem Yichud before you do every single mitzvah. Chazak. And wait, and his source is apparently a few words in the Zohar, which may explain your question, but by no means do I know for sure. The answer to most questions on this subject is I don't know. That's the honest answer. Then I can tell you other stuff, but that's all Baba Mises. But I'm suspecting that he took it from a few words in the Zohar. The Zohar doesn't say the L'Shem Yichud because the Zohar is 2,000 years old. But he inferred from the Zohar that every time you do a mitzvah, you should verbally say it, and this is the idea. That's the idea of saying L'Shem Yichud. I'm going to do a mitzvah, I have to say with my mouth, I am doing mitzvah for the sake of Hashem. That's the concept on a simple level. Now, the way the idea goes, ostensibly, objectively, is that there is a halacha that when you bring a korban, it has to be lishma. When you bring a korban in the base, some make those very particular kavanas. Now, depending on the korban, some korbanas, if you didn't have the right kavana, it's still good, but you have to bring another one, kind of thing. Some korbanas, if you didn't have the right kavana, the korban has to be destroyed. So depending on the korban, chatas, sin offerings, or the others, lishma is very important. Korban pesach and korban chatas. Shalom lishma, no good. But this rabbi said, don't just think it, say it. Like by karbones, when you brought a korban, there was a need to have an intent lishma. When you do a mitzvah, when you daven, you have to have an intent lishma. Now you must understand the dynamic of this. The dynamic of this is that in Judaism there's 3 levels. There's thought, speech, action. Right? In regular life, what you do matters. What you say and what you think doesn't matter. In preparing to make something holy, what you say matters, what you think doesn't matter. In the temple itself, what you think matters. In other words, the higher your level of involvement with the Eibishter, the more precise your engagement needs to be. If a kohen has a bad thought in the middle of bringing a korban, the korban is no good. Kavana. And this rabbi said, say it. Say it. Before each mitzvah. Particularly before davening. Why particularly before davening? Because davening is a korban. But in no means is it limited to davening. There's an idea in Yiddishkeit that before you do a mitzvah l'shem yichud, then again, they're beautiful prayers. They're gorgeous prayers. And when I go into an Ashkenaz shul and they're saying Sfira Sa'ima and they read l'shem yichud, they say, do you guys realize that you're breaking the rules of your team? One of the biggest issues the Ashkenazic Jewry had was that not every Jew is a Kabbalist. If not a Kabbalist, they shouldn't say it, and yet they say it. They don't even realize what they're saying. But this is sort of the story of L'Shem Yichud. The most important part of the story to me is how recent it is. It's historically yesterday. And yet it's been so widely accepted, which tells you about the credibility of this person. Someone had a hand raised. I saw a hand. Go ahead.
So would they say like this exact quote, or there would be different forms?
There's so many different versions of it.
So like every time they made a bracha, would they say it?
No. And that's a question. I said before, do you say it before benching? Do you say it before the Haggadah? So one of the arguments goes, you don't say a prayer before a prayer. Now we do it before the davening. So before benching, I think before benching they say L'Shem Yichud. Before a bracha, you see brachas, most brachas are not mitzvahs. Most brachas are themselves midrabanan. The exception is benching. And I don't know offhand, but I think before benching, they say, they say it. L'shem yichud, kutche b'echot shchinte, b'yachta, kutche b'echot, whatever it is. B'dechilu, rechimu, b'rechimu, dechilu, me'ahu, tamir, v'nelam, a whole bunch of beautiful words. That's the background. That's the sort of the story of the Shem Yichud. So what I'm saying is that as the custom plays out today, there are many Jews, Chassidim, Sfardim, people who follow Nusach Ashkenaz, who do things according to Kabbalah, do it before they do every mitzvah, literally. But most specifically before davening, because davening is like a korban, and a korban needs to be lishma. This is the story. So think about the timing. The person who wrote this, based on Rabbi Radin Evi Yisrael writes, he was born in 1700, passed away in 1780, okay? Very shortly thereafter, there was a Jew by the name of Yechaschel Levi Landau, known as the native Yehuda. Now, I didn't look up when he was born, but he wasn't born much later. He probably passed away in the 1780s, 1790, maybe around the same age. He was a Rav of Prague. There is a big rumor that he was a big misnagid. It was against the Baal Shem Tov. I saw from the Rebbe more than once where the Rebbe says it's time to dispel this rumor. He was not at all a misnagid. He had a personal relationship with the Baal Shem Tov. He had disagreements, but he wasn't a misnagid. And he has a tshuva, which I'm actually going to read to you. Where he lambastes this L'Shem Yichud like you have no idea. He rips it apart from every angle. You have to understand is when you're reading his writings, your first instincts are, who's he? Excuse me. He was almost a contemporary of the man who introduced it. The Arizal lived 200 years earlier. If you look at the Arizal Siddur, there's no mention of it. Now, they put it into the printed version. They put it in brackets that you should say it. But if you take out the Pri Etz Chaim, you take out the Shara Kavanas, the Arizal's writings on davening, it's not in there. I looked. Now, the Shara Koilel writes in a note that actually in the Esophagus, Hashmatas of the Arizal, there is something to this effect. But according to Rabbi Adin Even Yisrael, and I'm going to believe it, nobody actually wrote it down until much later, 150 years after that Arizal lived. And yet it became very widely accepted. Sfardim, Ashkenazim, Chassidim. So the Noda B'Yehuda wrote a scathing criticism of it, But when you understand how close he lived to the time the idea was introduced, it's not so scathing. We Hasidim are very sensitive. Don't you mess with us, Why? Because we're right. Why are we right? Because how can we be wrong? Of course we're right. So if somebody starts somewhere else, if you start up with the you say, what? I want to put the two psukim that are in the Tillim together, and then afterwards I'm going to put the pasuk from Mishlei, or something like that. Yeah. So who's going to? People would be very upset. Trust me. But it wouldn't be that emotional. It's a bad Jew and throw you out of the shul and finished. But we're sensitive about it. But when you realize that the Noda B'Yehuda was basically a co-generationalist of the man who wrote this prayer, he had every right to criticize. And it wasn't radical, and it wasn't misnagid, it wasn't against Hasidim. He was saying his opinion. That's what halachic authorities do. You have ideas introduced, one rabbi suggested, there says, no, I object. And he objects fiercely. And it's 4 paragraphs. It's 4 paragraphs, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's small type, but you're talking about one of the masters of Torah. In these 4 paragraphs, if you were writing this, you'd write a book. It's very concise. There was an enormous amount of detail in these 4 little paragraphs. And the first thing he says is, when you brought a carbon, did you say with your mouth you're doing it lishma, or you thought it? You thought it. So think it now too. Why do you have to say it? Now, the rabbi who was proposing it was arguing that you say it when you make a neder, you have to say it. I hate to bring up a sensitive subject, when a person writes a get, yes, I'm placing the shema, I'm writing for the sake of my wife's name, you have to say it. And he addresses the proofs, and he says, we've been doing it quietly until now, let's keep doing it quietly until now. Every time you do a mitzvah, you have to announce, I'm doing it l'shma. People have been putting on film for 3,000 years, they didn't have to say with their mouth, I'm doing this mitzvah for the sake of God. So we thought until now, keep thinking. He writes, the only thing that can happen is that you can mumble the words and then say something which is like really, really bad. Skip it. Don't think of it, just do it. So he has a philosophical objection. He's saying, by bringing this notion of lishma to a state of crystallization, in other words, you have to say it, you're actually creating much more problems than you solve, because people are going to say the wrong thing and say it in the wrong way, and it could be terrible. Just keep it the way it was. That's basically his argument. And it's a very, very, very logical. It's a totally logical argument. But in the course of this, he also, and it was so interesting is, he starts off the tshuva by telling this rabbi how much he disagrees with it. And then he actually answers him. The rabbi who wrote to him is asking him how to say it exactly. He says to him, you know what I think? I think you shouldn't say it at all. But if you're going to say it this way, which is real open-mindedness. He says, I think you shouldn't say it, but if you're going to say it, this is the right way to say it, which is a window into the greatness of the Noda B'Yehuda, where he tells you very forcefully not to do it, and at the same time he says, if you're going to go according to this other rabbi and do it this way. It's when I looked at this tshuva for the first time. I'm a Lubavitcher, so every Lubavitcher knows about this Noda B'Yehuda. Today I actually read it. And it's wonderful. You read Gdeli Achreinim. These people move the Torah like how many fingers you have, and you see balance. You don't see hatred of Chassidim at all. You see incredible balance. Anyway, my phone is not behaving with the broadcast. Let's see what happens now. So he says, don't say it. You're better off thinking the kavanah than saying the kavanah. You can only make it worse. That's his position. But in the midst of that, he raises another issue. And the other issue that he raises is very, very important because it has more than one ramification for us, which is this business of doing things according to Kabbalah. You need to understand that for a very, very long time, we didn't have the Zohar. We just didn't have it. Now, the Zohar is the same age as the Shas. It's as old as the Mishnah and the Gemara. But it wasn't as rigorously studied. Rashi didn't have the Zohar. The Rabbi Natam didn't have the Zohar. The Rif didn't have the Zohar. You understand? The Goinim didn't have the Zohar. The earliest and the latest Rishonim, the Zohar was discovered about 750 years ago. Something like that. And of course, it changed the world. Meaning there was Kabbalah. There was always Kabbalah. But the breadth of Kabbalah was a thread. The Zohar, it's only 3 books, but it's incredibly massive. It is so it's like Gemara. You know how much Gemara? If you would lay out the Zohar like the Gemara's pages, it would be many Masechtas. It's a lot. It's an enormous amount of information in these 3 books. There's just no commentaries around them because it wasn't been studied for 100 years. And the Zohar is the foundation of Kabbalah, and specifically how you do mitzvahs, what the kavanas are, and a lot about liturgy, a lot about nusach. So when the Zohar sort of shows up, there becomes a big question. So what do? We change everything? We have a tradition for hundreds and hundreds of years following the Messiah based on the Mishnah and the Gemara, which told us what davening we say and when we say it and how we say it and how we do this and how the whole tradition of the Jewish people is recorded in the Mishnah and the Gemara, and that evolves into the Shulchan Aruch and the commentaries of the Shulchan Aruch, and then of course in real time it's called the Shalos HaTshuvos, the questions that are answered by the Rabbonim in every generation that address issues that arise as you go, so to speak. But Kabbalah was a recently emergent phenomena, and it's claiming that it's ancient, but it's very uncomfortable. You know, I've been doing something for 2,000 years one way, and you come with a better way. I found the text, it's as old as your original, and you got to change. It's not so simple. So the way the tradition, of course, goes is that any idea in Kabbalah, which is not against ideas in Halacha, are pretty much universally embraced. Anytime there's a conflict between an idea and Halacha, the in Kabbalah, the Sfadim follow the Kabbalah and the Ashkenazim follow the Halacha. And Chassidim are like Sfadim on this issue. That even with this conflict in Halacha and Kabbalah, they'll follow Kabbalah as well. That's the way it breaks. So the Noidibid was an Ashkenazi. And the Noidibid Yehuda gets really upset about this whole new wave of Kabbalism. And I'll tell you how I mean it. To study Kabbalah is not easy. I don't know if you know that. To study Kabbalah is not easy. You need a really, 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 really good brain and a lot of background and a lot of education and a good foundation. But to follow the customs of Kabbalah, you just got to know what they are. So Noidibid Yehuda says, if you're a Kabbalist, if you're an expert, if you're the Vilna Gaon, who was an incredible master Kabbalist, and you decide that you want to do things according to Kabbalah, I don't say one word. But if you're the local shoemaker and tailor and barber and unemployed nudnik, and you become a big makobal, I have an issue. Who are you? And who is this? You've been davening 1,500 years, just keep doing what you're doing. And this becomes the Noidibid Yehuda's issue. He objects to L'Shem Yichud. He says, if the meaning of the L'Shem Yichud is that before you do a mitzvah, you have to orally say, I'm doing it l'shma, for the sake of Hashem. Until now, we thought it. Keep thinking it. Nothing good to come from saying it. And by the way, who are these nudniks? That's how it goes. You know, what's this? Everybody's a makubal, everyone's an expert at Kabbalah, and it really bothers him. And he digs in. This is a famous criticism of Noidibid Yehuda. He digs into Chassidim and Chassidus. I have still time, right? I still have time, right? So I want to read to you the tshuva. I don't do this often. I'm literally going to read to you about 10 lines of this tshuva of Noidibid Yehuda. It's the first time I've looked at it before, but I really studied the tshuva. I can't say I really studied. I studied the tshuva well enough to know And again, now that I read the whole tshuva, I sort of feel there's a lot of balance in his words, especially when you understand that the entire L'Shem Yichud was introduced by a man who basically lived at the same time he lived. He's not criticizing a 200-year-old custom. It was brand new. For us, it's an ancient custom. It's 300 years old, but the native Yehuda was very recent. So I'm going to read it to you. So this is a long tshuva where a Rav asked him questions. And you see the mastery of this man over Torah. It's delightful. The people who really know it make it sound so easy, Shas, they just quote it and it flows. It's so beautiful to read their writings because they're not struggling. They're never unsure. It's all in front of them, And then your fourth question, I'm reading and I'm translating. That your question is L'Shem Yichud, that new people very recently, it's radiated and they began to print it into Sidurim. You're talking about a minhag which was added to Siddur more or less in his lifetime. Hine. Now, again, there's 4 paragraphs. And in the later paragraphs, he explains from a halachic perspective his objection. And in the last paragraph, he actually says to the person asking the question, I don't think you should say it at all, but if you're going to say it, this is how you should say it, which I find to be so open-minded, really. He doesn't agree, but he says, if you're going to do it this way. And it's a shtickle Kabbalah, actually. My response is, instead of asking me how you should say it, why don't you ask me why we're saying it all together? In my opinion, it is an evil sickness of our times. And the generations before ours, they didn't know this text. And they never said it. They toiled their whole life in Torah and mitzvahs. Hakol was all according to the Torah. Poskim according to the Poskim. And of course, what he's trying to say is nigle without Kabbalah. But he doesn't have an issue with Kabbalah. He has an issue with the prayer, with the saying it. That their words all flowed from the fountain of living waters, which is Yam HaTalmud, the sea of the Talmud of the Gemara. Regarding whom it is written, the sincerity of the righteous, Yesharim is translated righteous, everybody those who walk on a straight line, will lead them and keep them safe. You do what your parents did. It's good. It's enough. These people who didn't know this old Kabbalah stuff, they made fruit on high. Their contribution, their love of Hashem, their kindness to the Eibishter is greater than the sky itself. However, but they know as that nowadays, ki azvu as Torah Hashem, they've forsaken the Torah of God. This is very strong. U'makor ma'achayim, and the fountain of living water, Shnei Talmud, and the 2 Gemaras, Bavli and Yerushalmi. Lach sev lahem beidas nishbad, to dig new wells that have no water inside of them. U'misnasim berum levavim, and they're exalting themselves with the arrogance of their own hearts. Kol echad oimer ish was I'm a prophet. I'm a mystic. I see God. And for me, we're open the gates of heaven. And for me, the whole world exists. Says the native Yehuda, they're destroying our generation. And now comes the famous words, on this orphan generation, I say, quote, it's a pasuk from Tillim, which he deliberately misquotes. Hashem, the ways of Hashem are fair. Tzadikim yelchubam, the righteous walk on them. The chasidim yikashlubam, and the chasidim stumble over them. And the pasuk it says, he took out the word poishe, which means a sinner, and he put in the word chassid, meaning to say he was an Ashkenazi. So he was speaking to the Ashkenazi community, although he knew quite well that the Sephardic community also adopted these new prayers. Understand that he was alive when this change was taking place, and he's really upset about it. The truth is, I have a lot to say on the subject. However, the Gemara said, just as it's a mitzvah, say what people are going to listen to. Kach mitzvah shalei lei medavish enish mitzvah not to say if people are not going to listen. And he's basically saying, no one's taking me seriously, so I'm not going to say another word. And he finishes with the words, Hashem yiracham aleinu, Hashem have mercy on us. Of course, the story that goes along with this tshuva is that the Neidim Yehuda had children who were chassidim of the Tzemach Tzedek. And they reprinted this tshuva. They were not out. Never say that. Never. But they wanted to read the pasuk at least as written in pasuk. Instead of a chassidim, say push them. Just write the pasuk written to them. So they came to the Tzemach Tzedek and they said, Rebbe, we want to repeat Shuvas Neidim Yehuda. They're Lubavitch chassidim. In Lubavitch, Landaus, that are Leviim, they're his grandsons. He was a Levi, his name was Landaus. Lubavitch Landaus, they're Einikaf Neidim Yehuda. So they came to the Tzemach Tzedek that they want to change it. Not to chas v'shalom take out the tshuva, but just instead of the word chassidim, which means me and you, it should say what the pasuk says. So the Tzemach Tzedek said to them, your grandfather made from every pesheya a chassid. You want to make from every chassid a pesheya? Your Zayda made every sinner into a chassid. In other words, the Tzemach Tzedek said, we don't touch a word. It's critical. It hurts. It stings. If you know the neighborhood, it really. If you know how great a man it was, it stings, and it's still here. I own this book. I have it on my shelf. It stings. It hurts. But we take the sting and we move on. You understand? But this was his objection. He felt that we shouldn't say it. And again, from a halachic angle, he says, think lishma. No one ever said lishma. It was always a kavanah. By karbanis, it's a kavanah. If the kohanim started saying what they're thinking about karbanis, it can only get worse. Think. And he actually says, better think less. Just do. But in terms of the liturgy and the prayer itself, he says, who is this? Now, part of what he's really saying is that, I shouldn't say part of what he's saying. Part of what you can infer from his words was, if a Jew who's really a makubal is going to do this, I can agree and disagree, but I can respect it. When it becomes something that everybody is doing, do me a favor. You don't have to count to 10. What are you doing, Kabbalah? And this is a big issue. And I'm going to continue this conversation next week, but I just want to say this as in closing. This plays out in our siddur. Why? Alter Rebbe made a siddur api nusach Arizal, which means he made a siddur based on the Arizal's adaptations to nusach of Kabbalah. And I've told this to you before. I'll probably begin next week's class with this again. That I knew Jews who used to say only the Rebbe's daven nusach Ari. In certain Hasidic groups, the Rebbe, the Tzaddik, davens are nusach, and the older Hasidim daven was called the Hasidic nusach start, which I call the Kesen Hoira, the Hasidical Kesen Hoira, which has a haskama from the Kohen Samagit. In other words, from Baal Shem Tov's contemporary. It's a very old siddur, and it's the Hasidic nusach. And we have in the Rebbe's library, I've never seen it, but there's pictures of it, of the siddur that Baal Shem Tov actually used himself. The physical siddur Baal Shem Tov used was a handwritten siddur with the meditations on the side. And that siddur is according to the Hasidic nusach. It's not our nusach. It's the Hasidic nusach side. Nobody knows for sure who wrote that nusach. But during the Baal Shem Tov's lifetime, Hasidim already went away from the classic nusach Ashkenaz and they began to do many things, including significant changes in the way siddur is arranged, what you say, what you don't say, and where you say it, based on the Yanim of Kabbalah. During the Baal Shem Tov's lifetime. So there are people who hold that the Hasidic nusach started all Hasidim daven, even though it's based heavily on Kabbalah. But the Alter Rebbe's nusach is so holy, it's only for big tzaddik. We had a Yid that lived in our block when we were growing up, who told my father, Zangezund, that in the old country, on the Amid where they davened, there was a Lubavitch Siddur. The whole community was Chassidim, not Lubavitch. They davened nusach start. The Chazan davened from our nusach. It's a funny thing. In other words, the Chazan was davening from different nusach in the whole community. The Chabad nusach, the Alter Rebbe Siddur, and the Chassidic nusach start is very, very similar. There's differences, mamish in minor words. But that was the tradition. The Shliach Tzibur davens from our nusach, and everybody else davens from nusach. Rabbi Jacobson, Saul Jacobson, in his biography, which is now published, tells the story. He came to America in 1926. And he was a Rav in a number of shuls in Borough Park, in Brownsville. a Vishnitz Chosid came in from Europe with a board. Nobody in America had a beard. Nobody. It was suicide to have a beard. Jacobson had a beard, but no one had a beard. And it was a Chabad shul. It wasn't a Lubavitch, it was a Chabad shul. Now, you know the difference between that, but there used to be more branches of Chabad besides for Lubavitch. It was a Mabroisky shul, a Kappas shul. It was Chabad, it was, in other words, they followed the Alter Rebbe, but it was a different channel, different one of the Tzemach Tzedek's grandchildren. And they davened the Schari. This Vishnitz Chazan walks in, and he sees a man who's clean shaven, standing by the Yomid and saying the davening from our Nusach. And he got really upset. And he said that his first Vishnitz Rebbe, Divrei Chaim, his name was Chaim, I forgot the name of his sefer, said that this Nusach is so special and so holy, and a Yid without a beard dares daven from this Nusach, but Amit, so no less, In other words, there was an attitude that it's not for everybody. And our Rebbe went on a campaign, it's actually in the Hayom Yom, to dispel that myth. The Rebbe I heard the Rebbe many times, but the Rebbe would argue it, he wouldn't just say it. The Alter Rebbe made a Siddur Shovel L'chol Nefesh for everybody. And he didn't make this nusach just for holy people, he made it for every Jew to say. Even though it's according to Kabbalah, even though it's according to what's called the 13th gate, that is on the whole business for everybody. And the proof is a simple one. If he meant it for holy people, he would have put the meditations in the Siddur. He would have put the Kavonis alongside the Siddur, like the Baal Shem Tov's original. The Baal Shem Tov's manuscripted Siddur has the nusach in the middle, the meditations around. It's Siddur Arizah with Kavonis. The Alter Rebbe did not put his Kavonis in the Siddur because he made it for everybody. So therefore, Rabbi Isai, notwithstanding the Neder Yehuda, we say L'Shem Yechad. But we, and I'm going to talk about this next week, Barichas Mitzvah Hashem, walk between the raindrops. When I was in that Satmar shul, and I told the guys how much I'm enjoying listening to them say this, a half a page about tzitzis. The whole thing, it includes the word the Shem Yichud, but it also involves Hineni Muchanam Mazum, and I'm getting ready to do a mitzvah. In other words, the idea of the Shema, I'm doing it with Hashem. And after he says the whole thing, he puts on his talis, and then they pace. Then he says another one for tefillin, and then he puts on his tefillin. And I told him I'm envious of him. Favus, is the Shem Yichud? You don't say the Shem Yichud? I say, yeah, we do it once a day. So you know what he's right with me? From the night to be You're afraid of the night to be You're afraid of this guy? No, maybe. The Alter Rebbe came up with a compromise that we do it once a day. We don't do it before every tefillah. And the Rebbe says the reason we do it once a day is because he made it for everybody. Had he made it from a Kubbalah, he said then he would have put it before every bracha, before every mitzvah. But because he wanted his nusach to be for everybody, we do it once a day. So are we afraid of Yehuda? In other words, is the Alter Rebbe's limiting the frequency of the recitation of Shemiach with the Rebbe Yehuda? Honestly, it's very possible. But no, you can't say that, because the Rebbe would say, if the Rebbe held that, he would say it. The Rebbe doesn't make a reference. I have the Sicha here, but the Rebbe certainly doesn't say in the Pnim of the Sicha that we don't say because of the Rebbe Yehuda's objection. He doesn't say that. But it's possible.
But the compromise insinuates that.
See, but the compromise doesn't have to be based on his criticism. The compromise that Alter Rebbe says objectively, from the Baal Shem Tov, from the times of the Arizah, from the times of the Baal Shem Tov, even non-Kabbalists follow Kabbalistic custom. That's really what it comes down to. Not only Kabbalists do things according to Kabbalah, the average Jew does things according to Kabbalah. He doesn't have to know why, he just does it. But L'Shem Yichud, once a day is enough. In other words, he didn't have to do it because of Nebuchadnezzar's criticism. He certainly was aware of the tshuva, there's no question about it. But did he react to it? Not necessarily. Maybe yeah, maybe no. But the position that he takes is consistent with the Nebuchadnezzar's argument. Since I want this nusach to be said by all Jews, including very simple people, if you're connected to Adassah Chassidim, and of course the Alter Rebbe ultimately wanted that every Jew should be connected to Chassidus, you're going to daven this nusach once a day is enough. Go ahead, talk loud.
What would be the problem of having the Kabbanis in there? Like, wouldn't that be helpful, not hurtful to the regular Jew davening? Like, it's not that, like, the Kabbalah you're saying to yourself, you're not saying the words out loud, that would be like a problem, like what this
Have you ever seen the Kavanas? Take a look and come back and ask me a question again.
Like, what
It's
is it
Greek.
helpful to have more instruction now versus less? Like what? Like how
It's
that?
Greek. You understand Greek?
No.
You understand Mandarin? That's as much as you understand. You understand anything. It's Kabbalistai. It's written like mathematical formula. It's so the whole thing is code. The whole thing is code. I was in 771. I've told this to you before. Rosh Hashanah. And a Yid is standing and davening with Siddur Rashash. Rashash of Shalom Sharabi. He lived around the same time as the Baal Shem Tov. What the Rashash did, I have a copy of Siddur at home, was he wrote out the Kavanos in longhand. So you have a full page. Baruch, a whole page of meditations. To the page. Atta, a full page of meditations. Hashem, you got your mind. So when you read the Kesharim, it just tells you the math. It's a few words, but the Rashash writes it out for you. So I'm watching you daven Mincha Rosh Hashanah, and he's turning pages, turning pages, turning pages, turning pages, getting through them one letter at a time. So I waited for him to finish. And I asked him, Ata Mevin, you understand what you're doing? No, I have it. I like it. I like it. I like it. Okay, it's a good answer. But that's the story. Okay, I'll see you in a week. Yeah, I covered less than I was planning. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
I have a quick question.
You normally sit here?
Yeah,
What is your name?
Lila.
Go ahead.
What's the purpose of the order of like where it's put? Like, is there
Order of
the order of like where Lashem Yafut?
his place?
Yeah. Like,
For us or for most Jews?
because it's in the middle of Shacharis.
Okay, we'll talk about it.
Okay.
It's not the beginning, it's the beginning of Shachris. It's the middle of Shachris based on how you understand what Shachris is.
Yeah. Okay.
You understand?
Yeah.
You really should say it before you start Shmoneh,
Right.
because Shmoneh is Shachris,
Right.
but you can't interrupt.
Got it.
This is the latest point that you can say something
Okay.
that's not part of the original.
I see. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you for coming and listening. Okay,
The Ashkenazi, they put Hodu after Bar
Right.
Mitzvah anyway.
yes.
I had a rabbi once that was like.
But the same Yichavayid, with the Atzah, with the Psukim in disorder, just like us.
The
Yeah.
rabbi was like.
Okay, anyway, good luck with your young co-workers. A little bit what?
I'm nervous, I'm gonna have to say something.
You have to think,
I'm thinking about it.
Yeah,
So she asked me, she feels that I could explain it, so I'm gonna give the more polite part.
but you have to say to her, tell her, you know what, tell her, with all the respect.
What would be the big?
I am 3 times your age.
Right, so I was going to say.
Trust
that.
me,
I was gonna
this
say
is
that.
good.
That's what I was gonna
You
say.
should really say
No,
that.
I was gonna say that.
Need
You
your
should be
feedback.
busy with this. I can say that, so respectful. But I
And it's also
just-
true.
Right, but, I just.
I'm listening.
No, there's a few young Lubavitchers.
Yeah, not a
You
few.
know, right, from Dali Rat.
I don't know. Whatever. Everybody's got issues. Everyone goes
I
through
told her,
this.
she also thought it was a close question.
A crazy question.
Yeah, she said to what are we?
Yeah.
But she said to her from a different perspective. What are you worried about the water? Whatever, I'm gonna figure it out.
Okay, good luck. Good
No,
luck.
Rabbi Paltiel, she doesn't get it, she wants to write to you.
She can write, and I put it on my list, and eventually I get to it. I mean, my list, I have like 100 questions I still need to answer. So she won't have a question anymore by the time I get to it, you know what I'm saying? But okay. Okay, let me turn this off. You know, I spent